Hey, how's it going? Thank you for watching. My name's James, and today I'd like to introduce you to the Junctions routing library, a new library for React, which I've just released. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through how to use it to create a really simple app. What I've got here is I've got a create React app project skeleton, which I've just created. And let's start by just adding a menu to it, because we're making a routing app, so menus are a place to start. We're just going to add a few links. We'll add a dashboard because every app needs a dashboard. And let's say we're making an app for, I don't know, an internal app to make sure we get paid. So we'll add a list of invoices. We can start that up using npm start, and with any luck, we'll have a very small menu. Every time we click a link, it'll reload the page. And you can see that with this flash, but we don't want to reload the page because we're making a React app. So let's use HTML5 history and push state to make sure that every time we click one of these links, it just changes the URL without reloading the page. So to do that, I'm going to use an npm package called history. So the reason I'm going to use history is because there are some sort of browser inconsistencies with the way that the history API works. So it just gives us a wrapper around the browser history API. And so we need to import that. And what this does is it creates a history object, which is kind of that wrapper that I was talking about. Once we've got this, what we want to do is every time someone clicks one of these links, we want to capture that click. And instead of reloading the page like we normally would, we just want to call history.push. So we could write our own component to do that, but there's one in the Junctions toolkit, so let's use that. It's called the link component. It's in the React Junctions library. And it works by passing something called a location object to the toProp. So a location object is kind of like a URL, except as well as just having a URL, it also has some other stuff. I'll show you how that works in a moment. And let's also install that library. And let's install the Junctions one as well, because we're going to use that later on. So there we go. So this here is called a location. This is used by history, and it's also used by Junctions. You can see that in the API here, the API information on the website. Here we go. So as you can see, it has a path name, it has a search, and it has a state. We just set the path name. We'd usually only really use the path name, but that's okay. So let's just shrink this window again. And now this is all installed. Let's start it up. What should happen with any luck is that after I save this, actually I forgot to do one thing. I need to pass the history object to this link component. If we don't pass the history object in, well, there is a way of passing it through context, which I'll show you later, but otherwise the link doesn't know which history object to call history.push on. So with this all done, we can now click, actually, I have to save it. We can now click dashboard or invoices, and instead of reloading the page, it just calls history.push every time I click it, and it updates the URL, which you can see here, without actually reloading the page. But how do we access those changes in location? Well, we use the history.listen command. We can have a look here. If we do console.log location, you can actually see that every time we click one of those links, what it'll do is it'll log one of those location objects, which I showed you earlier, with path name, search, and, well, it doesn't have state, but it can have state. It'll log that to the console. Logging it to the console isn't really that useful. What we really want to do is we want to use that location within the component. So to do that, what I'll do is I'll add the history to the I'll add a history.listen when the component starts up, and I'll store that location state every time it's clicked. So let's use constructor, and inside here we'll do this.state. We'll set the initial state to be history.location, which stores the initial state when you load the page. And then we'll also call history.listen. And let's add a handler to our component. So something like handle navigation, which accepts a location object. And we'll bind that, just because otherwise this won't mean the same thing inside of this handler. And then inside of this handler, let's add a location to the state. The last thing we need to do is we want to actually use this location that we've now got in our state. We want to display it somewhere within our render method. So let's just add it to the heading. And we don't need this anymore. Now, if this is all okay, then I mean, when I save this, it should, there we go. We've got the path name from the initial history location here, and then if we click something without reloading the page, it'll change it. And there you go. I mean, that's a really simple router. It works, and in fact, if you're writing an app and you don't have many pages, or you're writing a game or something a bit different to the normal CRUD apps, then this is a really good router. I mean, it works. It's simple. It's fast. It's performant. There's no reason not to just stick with this. But, I mean, these location objects, they can be a bit of a pain if you're dealing with a large application. Like, this can be even longer than this, these path names. You've got to split it out. You've got to somehow handle all of that. And that's why we have routers. That's why we have React router. That's why we have junctions. But since I'm talking about junctions today, let's have a look at how junctions helps with handling these location objects. So basically what junctions does, and the reason you want to use junctions, so I'll open this up again, is that it converts these location objects into something called a route object. Now, a route object, which you can see an example of here, it has a key, it has params, all of which are extracted from that URL. It also has data, which is kind of associated with a key, which you can add. We won't talk about that, but you can try that out later. You can have a look at this to see how to use it. But the main thing is this key. So this key, if you have, well, basically the routes key is picked from the URL and passed into this route object. Assuming you've got a route object, that is. So how is it that Junctions converts these locations into routes? Well, there's an easy way and there's a hard way. So I'm going to show you the easy way today. The hard way isn't really that hard. It's like 40 lines of code, if that. And it gives you a lot of flexibility, but just because I'm trying to show you the bare minimum today, I'm going to show you the easy way, which is something called a router component. So let's import that. Router component also lives in React Junctions. And what it does is it basically takes a history object, like this one or this one. It listens, it does history.listen internally, and it gives you a route instead of a location. So let's use one of these. So you pass in the history object, you pass in a render function. There's multiple ways of doing this. You can see in the documentation. Might show another one later. But for the moment, let's just pass in this render function, which receives a route and returns a div. I've done something wrong here because it's all in red. Let's just fix this. We can just use exactly the same div as we had before, except now instead of having a location, we've got a route. So let's fix that. Actually, let's also remove this. I have done something so totally wrong. Here we go. So instead of having a location, now we've got a route. And just like I showed you earlier, that route has a key. We can remove all of this now because the router component handles it for us. And that's almost done, except there's one problem, and you can see because I've just saved it and it hasn't refreshed. How does Junctions, or how does this router know how to convert a location into a route? And the thing is, we need to tell it. So how do we do that? What we use is something called a junction object, which is what Junctions is named after. These are basically the most important object in the entire package. So let's import create junction from Junctions, which I installed earlier. And let's create a junction object. Now, I'm not going to tell you exactly what this does just yet, but you can see what I'm doing is I'm basically specifying the different things which this component can render, and the different URLs which are associated with those things that it can render. And if I then pass that junction to router, then with any luck, when I save it, the page will render. But I don't have any luck today, so what have I done wrong? An object was passed to Junctions, which is not, and I've passed a history. I was about to do it again. This is why you should make these videos before 10 o'clock. Okay, so here we go. This router is giving us a route, and it's got that key property like I showed you earlier on. And cool, this is a router, and it works with first state, and it's all good. So what is this junction object? Well, a junction object is basically a way of specifying all of the different types of route which a component can render. So let's make it clearer that that's what it's doing. I'm just assigning it to this component. This is kind of convention that I use. If a component can render all of the junctions which are specified, all of the routes, sorry, which are specified by a junction, then we add it to the component's junction property. Now, one of the things is that each of these types of routes, it can actually guess what the path is based on the key. So because this is called the dashboard key, or the key is dashboard, the path that Junction will use without specifying the path is dashboard. And the same with Invoices. So we can remove these and it'll still hopefully work. There we go. And yeah, so this here is basically, each one of these things we pass in is an object specifying one type of route which this app can use. So another thing about Junctions, or about this router component in particular, is that because we've already passed the history to it, it knows how to pass history down to the link using something called route context. So if we remove that history, it'll still work. Now, using context is usually not a good idea, but passing history to every link in your application doesn't seem like a very good idea either. So this is the one place in Junctions which you can use history. You don't have to, because you can pass it a history object to each link, like I was showing you before, but let's get rid of it, because there's no point doing it if you don't have to. So there you go. That's basically your first Junctions app. Now, okay, so we've had to pass this junction in. Why is it that we have to pass this junction in? We know what it is. It specifies all of the different possible routes. But why does router need it? Couldn't it guess this key based on the URL? Well, to illustrate this, let me give you a URL. Say we have a URL, invoices/add. Now, does this refer to a page to add invoices, or does it refer to an invoice called add? I mean, it could be either of them. Maybe someone spelled advertisement with 2 Ds, like I used to. We don't really know, and the computer doesn't know either. So, I mean, it could be that that key should be add, or it could be that params, like route.params, should have an add invoice ID. So let's tell Junctions which one it is. Actually, at the moment, Junctions won't even, or this app won't accept that URL. But we can tell it that that is actually a valid URL by passing the parent type. We'll say it's required. And there you go. Now, how does it know that this is the URL? Well, the default URL when we pass a required param is to add that param to the end of the default URL without it. So the default URL for this, or the default path, sorry, when we have an invoice ID which is required, is this. So we don't have to pass that in. But if we wanted to change it to be like, I don't know, invoice please pay, I hope this will work. Now this is no longer the correct URL. Okay, so you can specify whatever path you want, but you don't have to specify the path. And usually, I mean, if you're specifying a single param type and it's required and it's got a key called invoices, then this is going to be the correct. What have I done? This is going to be the correct URL. So let's just go with that. And now that we've specified this param type, Junctions knows to add that to route.params. So let's say if we are rendering an invoices route, which we can check by doing this, then let's display that invoice name. There you go. Or we could say invoice number, and we can do whatever we want. So there you go. Slowly getting through all of these features. One of them is the param types, but say we don't want add to be a param. Say we actually want to have a screen which lets us add an invoice, and we want it to be invoices/add. But we also want to be able to specify something like, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at the same thing. And perhaps we want to actually have a list of invoices as well. So we want to display an invoice, we want to be able to add an invoice, and we want to be able to list invoices. We could use a master detail view for that. And I mean, when we get all this complexity, it sounds like we don't really want to add this to this app component. We want to add it to a whole new component. So let's create one. We'll call it invoices screen. I often call my components which handle Junctions screens. It's just a convention I use. And let's add some boilerplate. We're just going to use a normal React component because it doesn't have to be anything special. You just render a div and a list and some content. So I'm not going to add any links yet because it's going to take time and I just want to display something as fast as I can, which let's add a divider between these. I hope that works. Yeah, so let's actually display some content as well. So if the key is invoices, let's use this new component that we just added. We need to import that. And let's not pass the param types through here anymore. Our menu doesn't support that yet. And so let's just get rid of this for a moment. We can add that back later in the other component. So if any luck, which I don't have that much of at the moment with these kind of things. So, cannot read key of undefined. Right. because I just changed this. Here we go. So we're rendering our new screen. Problem is it doesn't have any sort of navigation. But I mean, if we have a look at this whole list, even though it doesn't have links, it will eventually have links. It's kind of like a switch. Like we can switch between this invoice, or the add invoice screen, or we could just display the list. And in a way, it's very similar to this. I mean, this is a switch as well. We're switching between the dashboard and invoice screen. And depending on the current value of that switch, or the current position of that switch, we'll display some content. And it's exactly the same here. Like, this is the content we're going to display, and this is the switch. So, I mean, it looks like we can model this with a junction. So let's import create junction. And so what types of route can Invoice's screen render? It can either render an invoice, which has an ID, or it can render the add screen. Now, we don't need to specify a path if we don't want to, but let's specify this. Because by default, this is going to say /invoice/ID. But since we're already going to mount this at /invoices, that'll be a bit redundant. So we can just specify this. Now, you might worry, okay, so if we have /invoice_ID here and /add here, how does it know which one to use? Well, params are always considered last. So if there is an add path, then that will be used. If there's an add branch with that path, it'll be used. If not, it'll look for one of these. And you can only have one of these sort of param routes at one place. So that's okay. We don't have to worry about that. Okay, so I mean, we've got this junction. What this junction is specifying is that the invoices screen can render one of these two routes. Now, I guess what that means is, because this is a component, it's just a normal component, it's nothing special, we're probably going to get something like a route property from the outside world. So, something like this. And that route, let's just say it's going to follow the same format as the one I showed you from the documentation earlier. It'll have route.key, it'll have route.params if it makes sense. And so let's just assume that, and let's use that to render something. So if the key is, actually the other thing it could be null, because we haven't got a default here. So the junction may have no value of the switch, in which case we just render the list. So if we do have a route, then let's render something. And depending on what that route is, then we might render a new invoice form, or we might display an existing invoice. This is not going to work, because it never works the first time. But it looks like it's worked. Of course, the route at the moment is null, because we're not passing anything in here. But let's fix that. So we've got this component, and this component accepts a route. How do we actually get this route? So I guess we're going to have to pass it in from our app, because our app is the one which is rendering this invoices screen. So one of the things, and this is one of the things that Junctions does for you, is that, well, let's forget about Junctions for a moment though, actually. This invoices screen, this is a React component. One of the things React does for you is it lets you compose components. Like if you've got this app screen, it can render an invoices screen. So it can include this component within another one. And Junctions lets you do the same thing, but instead of with components, it lets you do it with junctions. So what we can say is that for this invoices branch of our junction, if the URL, or the first part of the URL, corresponds to invoices, Then we'll use the next part of the URL for the invoices screen junction. So anything after this is going to be handled by this junction, or I should say specified by this junction. And if we tell Junctions this by passing this junction as the next junction for the invoices branch, then whenever we're rendering an invoice, then we have access to this. It's called the same thing. It's called the next route. And route.next is just another route. Like if you have a look at this route that I showed you earlier, you can see that's what this next is. Now this is a little bit of a complicated example, but this here is a route. You can ignore the main. You're allowed to specify multiple junctions or multiple next junctions. We've only specified one. So directly under that route, we have another route which corresponds to that invoices screen. So if we save this and have a look, then it doesn't work. Of course it doesn't work, because what have I done? I haven't actually specified that invoices screen.junction is this junction. So there we go. Now I can add at the end, and we'll show a new invoice. Or I can add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we'll say invoice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's mostly everything that you need to know. You can nest screens like this. You can use junctions in the router object to convert locations to junctions. You can create so I'm mixing up all my words. You can create real reusable components. So this invoices screen can be reused anywhere. Or the only problem though is that these are still not links. And you know, one of the reasons I'm making a big deal about how you can reuse this component is if we add string-based links to these, like if we add URLs to these, then we can't reuse the component anymore. I mean, we know that in this app, with the way it's set up at the moment, invoices 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we could put that in here and it would work. But the problem is that means this component is now tied to this app. It's not reusable. In fact, if we want to use the same component to display an invoice list somewhere else within the app, we can't, because the strings tie us to this one location. And what we'd really like to do is, instead of passing a location, or what should I say, instead of passing a location or a URL, we'd like to pass a route. So let's say, for example, it'd be really nice if we could just use a link component, which I need to import before I forget. So let me just do that. Let's say we'd like to pass a route, and we can create a route for that junction by using the junction.createRoute method. And this is an invoice key, and then we pass in the params. This is actually quite similar to React's create element method, if you know it, so easy to remember. Let's add a couple more of these. This one is the add key, and it doesn't have any params. Let's just close up these link tags. So wouldn't it be great if we could do this? The problem is, if I save this, it's not going to work, because we can't, unfortunately. I mean, it'll render, but nah, nothing's happening. The problem is that this link element, this link component, it expects 2 to be a location, which you can see if you have a look in here. If you click on the link component, 2 needs to be a location. Unfortunately, it can't be a route. And so even though we have these routes, and we know that this is the route we want to link to, we can't just do that as it stands. So wouldn't it be great if there was a way to convert route objects, like these ones, to location objects? I mean, if we had such a way of doing it, it would have to depend on the outside world. Like the outside world, or whoever is consuming this component, would need to tell us how to do that, because we don't know where we're going to be mounted. So, I mean, what we want is something like this, really. A function called locate, which locates routes. It turns routes into locations. So something like this. So it'd be really nice if we could do this. Is what I thought to myself when I was building this library. So as I guess you'd probably guess, there is a way of doing that. This locate function, which turns a route for this junction into a location, which makes sense given the context that the component is in, that is available on our route, on the parent route. So the parent route's locate function can be used within the child component. And if we save this, then here we go. If we click add, it'll take us to the add screen. If we click Invoice 2, obviously made them both one. If we click Invoice 2, it'll take us to that. And even though we haven't hard-coded these locations, this locate function is able to generate the location for us. And what that means is this is a real reusable component. We can reuse this anywhere. We could use it twice in the same application. We could use it over different applications, all at different locations. And so that's what Junctions is. It's a library to convert locations to routes and routes to locations, and to do so in such a way that your components are actually really reusable. They're not route handlers, they're real components that just happen to support routes. So that's basically all there is to it. So let's just finish up by making this look a little nicer, because honestly, having an anonymous function at the core of our application is kind of shit. So I'm going to create a new component. And instead of rendering all this in an anonymous function, let's back this out to another component. Something like this. Let's say we're going to get this route passed to us as a prop. And so the thing about the router component is that it doesn't just have to have a function for render. You can actually pass in an element, a React element. And what it'll do is it'll add a route and a locate prop to this. So you actually get both. You get route and you get locate. And you can use locate to generate this path name, but we won't do that for the moment. So if I save this, hopefully it'll work. And for a change, it actually does. Here we go. We can make this even nicer by using a switch statement. Like one of the things I was saying earlier on is that basically this junction is just a switch, or it defines a switch, and then we can use a switch here, which is a little nicer than having all of these inline conditionals. So here we go, route.key is invoices. We'll just take our invoice screen, and we'll render it, we'll return it. And if route.key is undefined, well, if route is undefined, what undefined means is that it couldn't actually find the route we were looking for. It didn't understand the URL at all. So let's just return what computer says no. And the default case is that it's some other route. So let's just do this. But you can do whatever here. And let's call that. With any luck. I should stop saying that, because every time I say it, it doesn't work. I need to pass this in here. Cool, so that works. And if I give it an unknown URL, it'll give me a 404, which is exactly what we want. So one last thing is, any good app needs a title. And one of the great things about Junctions is that we can pass props to our route handlers like this. So, I mean, it's not the best app in the world, but I'm supposed to call it that. I'm an artist, so my apps have style. Not very good style. There we go. The best app in the world, and it's a 404. So that's basically everything there is to Junctions. I mean, you could create a pretty good app with this. I've actually got an app in production, and the Junctions website, which you were looking at earlier, this uses Junctions under the hood. So you can make some reasonably good stuff with this. There's some stuff I didn't cover. Like I mentioned, there's a hard way to do the routing other than using that router component. It's not really hard. In fact, you can see it if you have a look at the source. I won't go into this, but if you have a look here, this is the hard way of doing it. If you do this all yourself, you've got a lot more flexibility, and everything here is using functions exported from the public Junctions API. So you don't have to use router. Another thing I didn't cover is there's actually a data property which you can pass to your Junctions, which is then passed to the routes. This can be really useful. You can do things like define titles for your routes. And the other thing I didn't cover is you can use Junctions to render multiple junctions, or to add multiple junctions to the child to the next property. So that means you can compose multiple routable components in one component. And I mean, the practical usage of that is you can add modals, and you can add multiple tabs on the same page. And so you can do all sorts of gnarly stuff, which wouldn't be advisable, but your client might ask you to do anyway. So yeah, it's a very flexible framework. I hope you find it useful. I've found it useful for the last 6 months or so, and that's why I really wanted to publish it. And if you have any questions, send me a tweet. My Twitter is James_K_Nelson. Thank you for watching, and hope to see you again soon.